Frank, thank you so much for this opportunity. So today we will talk about Amplify UI, which is a comprehensive and flexible React Native library of components that we are creating. And we'll go into the weeds here. We'll go through all the details about it. But before we start with talking about Amplify Labs briefly. So who we are? We are a complete development and design consultancy focused on delivering end-to-end digital transformation solutions for enterprise organizations of all kinds, right? So we call ourselves as a software boutique as well as, and this is relevant to the content that we will present here today, right? So, and we are able to provide you and your company a highly customized application, so both web and mobile applications. Our goal is to provide you and your customers a unique experience, right? So, and we treat our clients as partners. So we develop mainly, as I already mentioned, web and mobile applications, and our core technologies are TypeScript, React, and React Native for front-end development. Also, on the front end, we really like to use Tailwind CSS and in most of our projects. And on the back end, we typically make use of Node.js. And recently, we are more using serverless frameworks with Node.js. So that means that we can create products that scales perfectly with your necessities. So this is what I would call our bread and butter technologies. But it's also important to mention here that we work with another languages, for example, like Python, which we use especially for AI, image processing, or computer vision, and data mining, right? So this introduction is also important, relevant to the content that we'll presented here. You will understand that. So our agenda today, we'll start talking about what is Amplify UI, what it's not, and why we have decided to create a new library, right? So this is an important question, and we want to make sure that everyone understands that. Next, we will talk about the current status of development of this library. Then we'll dig deeper into the key concepts of the library itself. We will take a closer look on what is React Native, what is Tailwind CSS, that are core technologies to use with this library, and finally talk about a few concepts on accessibility. That is another goal that we have on this technology that we are creating. On the next topic, we'll have a brief introduction on how to install the library of components and how to bootstrap it as well. And also how to we'll provide some information about documentation, and finally we'll have a demo where we can play and adjust things in real time, right? So we can experiment things with you in real time here. So an introduction to Amplify UI. What is it? So it is a library of components, first thing to say, right? So probably at this point, it's pretty clear that that is what Amplify UI is, a library of components, right? But just for the sake of knowledge and alignment here, what is a library of components? Some people might be asking. So it is a set of reusable blocks or parts in an application that builds the visual experience on a GUI, which is a user interface, right? A graphical user interface. So in other words, those are reusable blocks of what you see on a daily basis while interacting with technology in general. So for example, a button on a mobile application, an input field, for example, or even something like a scrollable view or a spinner that shows you that some data is being processed. All of those pieces, let's call pieces, can be considered as components of your projects, of your project. So a few years ago, I don't know who is that old here, but I am, right? So the concept of having a set of custom components was something not that common. So let's take as an example a Windows application, right? So 10 years ago, a button on a Windows application or in any other operational system, we can make the same statement about macOS, for example. So all look exactly the same, right? And it's still kind of true in some conditions. So if you are still using VB, all buttons will look the same. But that happened even for web, right? So we had a button on a website, for example, and people didn't take the care of changing it to make a custom user experience. They all were gray, they all work exactly the same, right? Now, thanks to the designers, and they are very creative and they create a lot of new stuff, and we'll talk about this soon, but for each project, we want to provide an exclusive and unique experience. So every project now starts evaluating which kind of customers the new app is aiming for. And then the UI UX guys, which are the experts that dedicate their brain to think on how things should interact with people. So they will evaluate what is the optimal color palette to communicate properly with a specific public. So let's say you're dealing with people in healthcare, you will communicate with these people in a different way from, let's say, in the security area or militaries, whatever. And they even determine things like if a button should be rounded or with sharp edges, how shadows will be applied to different areas, and all that. Those experiences will vary depending on customers and applications, right? So this is the new standard and on how people want to interact with applications. So in this case, you have a highly customizable front end. You have a different experience for each different project, right? But you probably want to still have a set of, or you want to consume or create a set of components for your project and reuse those components across your interface as much as possible. So you don't want to create a button, a single button for each screen that you see in your application. You just want to create one and reuse it across all the places that this is necessary. And that makes even more sense now that we have SPA applications or single page applications, right? So you don't need to recreate the button every time. You just need to consume a button that you can create one reusable one, or you can consume one that someone else created, right? So this is why we want to use libraries of components. We can reuse the components that someone else created and be able to make those components look like I need, or how my designer specified, right? Another thing is that with the Tailwind UI, Amplify UI, sorry, we are aiming on mobile applications first, right? And there is a bunch of reasons for that. So we have actually a huge set of libraries of components for web applications. We have solid options like Material UI, which is a library of components based on material design concept from Google. Some of those have a good support for accessibility, some does not, but the truth is that the web environment is in general way more evolved than the mobile, right? So we are creating web applications. Let's consider since the beginning of the web, right? So we are doing that for 30-ish years now, and mobile applications in comparison are quite what is the right term for that? But we are not using that much time, right? So let's say 10-ish years we have smartphones, for example, right? So on the mobile side, we still have I'm being very honest and open here, we still have a dispute between the companies that produces the operational systems as well. So they want to have control on how to build applications, for example, which languages they want us to use as developers. And each one has its own way even of thinking about a mobile application, right? So we need to be aware of that. And because there is the scene on the mobile application development is not that evolved, and we as a software company, we face these challenges all the days, right? So in a daily basis, and we have this strong feeling that there is a necessity to make a library of components for mobile, especially, that attends the necessities that we have as a company, and we'll talk deeper about this sooner. So another thing is that this library of components, it is based on React Native. So we use React Native in our company as the default technology, and there are a few reasons for that. One, we really use TypeScript in all of our projects internally. And we can use this same programming language to build the backend services, the API or APIs, whatever you want to call it, or in other words, everything that runs in a server, right? So the things that you don't see in your devices, but are processing data in real time. So for example, talking with a database, right? And at the same time, we can use the same language to build the user-facing part of the application. Just as a reference, for example, when you develop natively using Swift or Objective-C or Java or Kotlin, which are the native languages to build mobile applications, you need a team to build specifically to each platform. So you need a project, kind of separate project for Android and another one for iOS. In this case, by using React.js, we can just create one code and compile for both, right? And just for the sake of comparison here, there are more players in the market. So I will mention Flutter, for example. So Flutter uses Dart as the programming language. But look, you cannot, you most likely won't build your backend system on Dart, for example, right? So it makes sense to have a single programming language that solves all of your problems, right? And just to complement here, so also devs, so by the fact that the devs are, typically we have front-end and back-end devs, right? Or it's kind of separate teams that operates integrated. But in this case, by using the same technology, both teams can also exchange information in a better way, right? Talking the same language, and it makes the process of developing applications easier. So the next key point for this library is that we use Tailwind CSS, and we will have a session specifically about Tailwind, right? So Tailwind is a utility-first framework. That means it's very different. It's a very different solution on how the regular library of components applies styles, for example. So usually they have themes which are JSON objects and with different layers, and you specify things in that way. Tailwind works in a totally different way. So it's a utility first CSS framework, which means the syntax was designed to, like, you have a goal in mind, you just do it, right? So it's a pinpoint on the project. It will become very clear very soon, but you do things in a more direct layer compared to the components. And finally, another key component of this, the concept of this library, is that we are using TWRNC, which is Tailwind React Native. And it is a library that makes possible to use Tailwind CSS, which is primarily a web library, right? So Tailwind React Native makes compatible with mobile applications. And this is what we do on Amplify UI. So more about what it is. So yes, it is open source. So you heard it right. All the code from Material UI is now, Amplify UI is now open sourced. You can use it for free. You can also contribute to developing it. You can have interest in doing that. If you have interest in doing that, right? So feel free to reach out to us, and you can start using, you can, if you want to create documentation, if you want to make a push request, that's fine, right? So we are totally open to that, and we want to contribute to the open source community with this project. Also, this library was created to be simple, right? So soon we'll have a take a look on some examples, but I'm really not lying. The resulting code looks clean and organized. Also, it's part of our goal to not overcomplicate anything, right? So it means, let's say we feel the necessity of creating a new component, for example. So if we are adding too much properties to these components, then we'll reevaluate and check if we shouldn't create a new one separate from the original one, should not overcomplicate things, right? So we want to make it easily applicable, and you know that when you have too much properties, things start to get too challenging to implement, and we want to avoid that. So simplicity in general is also correlated to elegance, right? And who is the developer knows that developers likes elegance in code. And another challenge that we see as a company, so we are working in a few applications that demands also accessibility, right? So this is one thing that we think about in all of our projects. So we start evaluating, okay, so let's start using a library, which one guides us to using the right tags, for example, and creates a good experience in terms of accessibility, right? So there are two components for that. One is driving the developers to do the work in a right way in terms of accessibility. And the other one is providing, and this is the final goal, of course, the main one, which is providing a good experience to people with disabilities, right? So we start looking on and making a research on libraries that does this as a key concept. And it's more like a secondary objective for some of them, and most part of them even don't mention anything about accessibility, right? So, for example, things that we do here, and we'll talk about this deeper later, but we have, for example, mandatory properties and minimum clickable areas. Okay. So, and last but not least, we want to simplify our mobile development workflow internally as well. We want to be able to easily apply and extend components using Tailwind CSS. And one key thing here is that the standard for web development in our team is using Tailwind CSS. So it makes totally sense to use the same technology all across our workflow, right? So including mobile and web. And we also want to have good code quality and good productivity across web and mobile. We want to keep consistency in terms of our best practices in development, and we want to transform hard tasks, just like implementing, for example, animations, right? So I'm talking about modals that closes and opens, or spinners. So we don't want to expose people to needing to really creating the transitions. We want to create those components for them, and they just will use. And finally, the last concept of all this is we heavily depend on SVGs to render icons, call to actions. So everything that is not really a picture, right? We want to process as SVG. So we already do that on the website. And I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but SVGs are not processed natively on mobile applications, right? So we want to add this feature, this layer of integration here as well, right? So SVGs, they have a few of like advantage. So one is they scale perfectly. So no matter how big or how big is your screen or your screen pixel density, right? You will never see the pixels on your application. And it's possible to manipulate SVGs in real time, which is really cool. So you can change colors real time, things that you cannot do in PNGs and JPEGs. What it's not, so it's not a framework. And I want to make in this case here, framework, my definition of framework is more like a box, right? So we don't want to put devs into a box and restrict them. We are talking about freedom to be able to easily extend the look and feel of any application, right? So freedom is a key feature of this library, because we need freedom to implement the amazing things that our designers create, right? They are very creative, and we need to prepare to be prepared to integrate anything. Another thing here is we are not recreating Tailwind or TWRNC. We are just using those libraries. We are building on top of those, right? So it would be great to have a partnership with those libraries, the people behind it somehow, right? So why a new library finally, right? So first, I would like to say that we as a company try to not reinvent the wheel. So this is how we operate as a company. So it's not because you can do something new, we will do that. We rather prefer to reuse existing solutions as much as possible, right? So I just want to make it clear here, because we saw a reason to create a new library of components, right? And the first one, and there are a lot of internal reasons for that, but I'm pretty sure that the same reasons applies for most part of the projects, right? So we want to be able to, so we as devs, actually, we know how to properly communicate to the dev community, and we think about the pain on who will use this library. We put ourselves in their positions, and we try to address that in the best way possible. We want this library to feel like a guideline for users, right? So for example, whoever uses it must be directed to the right things in terms of accessibility, for example. So if a tag, for example, in an image is necessary. It is mandatory on our library of components, right? So we make it explicit, and people need to add this tag, right? Finally, having consistency on technologies that we use across different projects is also about reducing chaos on software development. And this is the main goal of project management in software development, right? So we want people to naturally follow best practices, because the library that we built is trying to do that in a seamless way. Also, we want to contribute to the mobile ecosystem. We want to be part of the evolution or the definitions on how things will look like in the future. So I'm talking about, let's say, after 30 years of web development, things are pretty much solidified in terms of technology and how to do things. And we want to contribute in the mobile side to be able to do the same, right? So our main goals here are, just summarizing here, is to make it easier to manage with teams in general, communicate properly with developers, and document by examples, right? So we'll take a look on that soon as well. So we are creating expos next, for example. That means you have sandboxes to play around the code. You can experiment on things. And we strongly believe that this is like a strong tool to offer to the community, right? So you, as the devs, you can fork content at any time, experiment, right? We also want to speed up and improve quality in terms of processes internally. And you can do the same by using this library. Create an internal standard for mobile development, make the code better looking, and stimulate componentization. So what I mean here is, so look, we will never create a library that covers all the cases, right? So this is virtually impossible. But we built that in a structured way that stimulates you and your team to keep creating new components based on existing ones, right? So let's say, for example, you have a customized, you have a button, for example, in your project. You can create a custom component on your project using our button from the library, for example. All right, let's talk about the status of development. So it's not complete, first things to say, right? So it's still a work in progress. We are using this library of components on 3 different projects internally for production, right? So we feel like we have the basics to execute our projects, and as we find new components to be added here, we are adding to the library as well. But I would like to invite you to be part of this process as well, right? So feel free to contribute anytime in any way. It can be documentation, can be just using it and providing feedback. That would be great for us. And lastly, to mention here on this part is, this is a learning process for us as well, right? So I will not say that we know everything about everything. I will never say that. We are always learning something, and it's been a great experience on creating a new library of components and learning through this process, right? So, and we want to learn with you as well. So feel free to reach out. All right, so I mentioned previously that we'll take a closer look on React Native. So React Native is a cross-platform technology to build. It was created first to create Android and iOS applications. Nowadays, you can also create Windows and macOS applications, right? So this is something, so as a company, we seek for like reuse of knowledge and having a strong team that is able to to create applications for all the different scenarios, right? So that's why React Native fits so well into our workflow. It was also created by Facebook, right? And as React.js, right? React.js, which is the web counterpart, is also from Facebook. And just reinforcing here, so this combination of JS or TypeScript in our case, right, plus Electron, React makes it possible for us to create anything, right, any kind of application, covering the backend and the front, including web and mobile experiences. So some key concepts here about Tailwind now, okay? So classes, so this code here in the right side, this is how you usually create something. So this code is for web, okay? But this exactly the same applies for mobile, okay? So this code, you can see this section here. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer through the presentation. I hope so. But this section here at the top is where your real code lives. Everything that comes here at the bottom, from here to here, are the specifications on how to style those components. So those are class components. Yeah, class styles, let's say. This code here is the same, is doing exactly the same thing, but using Tailwind CSS, right? So you can see here that, for example, it specifies the size of the font, the weight, the color, and a bunch of different things, and it produces way less code. So, for example, here we have a shadow, right? And here we have the same shadow. I don't know if you can read it, but we have the same shadow with just one word, right? That makes things way cleaner to implement. Another concept about Tailwind CSS is about sizing, right? So everything is determined in terms, for example, W96 here, right? So that means 96 times 4 pixels, right? In general, it's not pixels in reality because everything is defined in terms of PEM units, right? So everything is, so as you define here, you think that you can see here that the bars are growing as the number grows here. And this is how you implement, you specify sizes for absolutely everything. So it could be a GIF, it could be a button, it could be absolutely anything. So colors, so all of those colors that are being represented here comes automatically with the Tailwind basic theme, let's say that. So you can call colors, for example, I want to define a background, and this is what is being done here. So I have the color called sky here, and I have like different shades is not the right word here, but yeah, I don't know the best word for this, but you have like all those colors here are related to those options here. So you can specify how strong a color is based on a simple parameter like this, right? And another example here is just to create a square box here with this for this parameter. It's simple as this, right? So this is why in general devs loves Tailwind. And just another example here on Tailwind. So for example, to specify typography, right? So we have the size of the text, we have the weight of the text, we have the color, everything defined here in a very simple way, right? So for example, applying different font families, for example. So sans, serif, mono, you can do this easily, just calling the right property here on the code. And finally, about shadows again. So you don't need to let's just return to this example. So this whole line here is just specified the same shadow that is represented on one of those boxes. So it's pretty simple to work with tailwinds in a standardized way. And to close the concepts here about accessibility, what we are doing in this library of components is making all the, for example, on images. So we make it mandatory to use to put the right labeling to the image. So that means for a person that has accessibility turned on, for example, when this person clicks on the image, the content of the image will be described to that user. So that is mandatory in our library. Also, we have accessibility roles. So this is not implemented to all the components so far, but we are working on in order to achieve that pretty soon. So all the components that we have created, all the custom components that we have created, they have the accessibility roles applied correctly. So that means in React Native, we don't have, for example, a checkbox component. This is not part of the vanilla implementation of React Native. So that means that you need to build one yourself or use another one from a library, right? So, but when we create those components, when we create a checkbox in our library, we make sure that the mobile application understands it as a checkbox, right? Also, we work in order to make it compatible with keyboard navigation. So it's not that common, but people can use keyboards to navigate through mobile applications. So we want to make it work properly, right? And another area here that is important is all the components that are clickable on mobile applications. The recommendation is that they are at least 48 pixels in size or in both directions, width and height, right? So even if the component is smaller, the area that will recognize the click is bigger, right? So, and this is also implemented by default in our library. And finally, like even a button can have, so let's say in this example, we have a button with 36 pixels of height. We'll still make sure that the clickable area is 48 of height. All right, so now it's probably the best part. So how to use it, right? So we have an npm repo for this library. It's called @AmplifyUI mobile, right? So, and there are a few, so we have the description for absolutely everything on this library. So we have the documentation how to use things. So we don't have all of the components that we created so far, but we are working on that. So, but the documentation for each component that is implemented is very complete. So we have an example, we have the description, we have examples on how to implement different buttons, for example, right? So we know your pain as a dev, and we try to be your friend in that case, right? So we want to provide the documentation that I would expect as a dev to be able to do different things in terms of components on a library. Also, for all those components, we have a table with what are the mandatory parameters and what are the optionals, right? So the basic structure here is almost all of the components will demand to have the TW function. So this is, I will show this in a few minutes to you, but so this is the Tailwind implementation, right? And we are, as we want to use, so let's say you have your implementation of Tailwind in your project. We want to make sure that we are consuming exactly the same one in our side of the project, right? So instead of installing it on the inside the component library, we decided to use that as a parameter because we want to make sure that what you have defined in your specifications on Tailwinds are being propagated to our components as well, right? And another parameter that shows up in almost all of the components is the style, right? So as optional, of course, but this is a Tailwind style where you can extend, make things different, right? And in some cases, let's pick one example here. So in some cases, for example, here the chart, we even have some charts on the library. Actually, just this one for now, vertical bars. But we have, for example, yeah, that was a terrible example. Here, this one. Okay, so about the buttons, for example, we have, we can add icons to the right. We can add icons to the left. We can specify specifically how the text will look like. So that will just apply to the text layer in your component, right? So this is the general concept that we have. And we try to make as less mandatory variables as possible. And all of those variables here. So for example, actually not all of them, but for example, the text style, there is a default option there that you can overwrite as you need. Right? So this is the approach that we are taking here. Finally, I have created a sample application, right, to do some experimentation here very quickly. So I created I don't know who here has access to Expo, but it's a online tool. I'll show it here. So you can here, it's another way of building React Native components as well. I don't recommend that for production environments because, you know, when you get too tied to a technology specifically, it's hard to get rid of that when you need. And sometimes it's really necessary to get rid of Expo. But they have a very cool feature here, which is called snacks. And that means you can create sandboxes and you can start creating mobile applications, even not having a Mac, for example, or not having Xcode installed on your machine, not having Android Studio installed on your machine. So you can experiment in real time. So I would just open here. This is the example that I created for this demo here today. Let's see how long is the queue here. Yeah, 9. So I will run from my device here and share my screen with you. But you don't need a real device to start building anything. You just need a browser, and you should be able to start experimenting on our library. So this is the example that I have created here. So I'm running from my physical device here and screen mirroring the application that I have created here. So the whole goal here is to take a survey for this presentation. So if you like it, if you didn't like it, and I would really like to know what are your opinions about that. But basically, it has a very simple it works in a very simple way, right? So I'll just type basic information. I don't need to type everything, just put this information. So I will not. Okay, let's say that it met, and let's say that it was for personal enrichment, and I would like to recommend this for colleagues. Okay, I won't submit all the fields here, but all of them are working. So I would hit submit, so you can see this loading here, this toast message. So everything here that you are seeing is implemented using Amplify UI, right? So all the input fields, and if I open here the spreadsheet, this is the record that I just added right now. So I set it math and personal enrichment as for the questions, and I can see the data in real time. So let's play here and do some adjustments, right? So that is the funny part of the presentation. So I would change, for example, the background. That was even wrong. Okay, so I would change for, let's say, I know it will look terrible, okay, but let's change the background of the application to a blue, right? And voila, it's done, right? So it's done real time. So, and this is the beauty of Tailwind CSS. And so let's change some things on our component. So let's say in the input text, for example, I want to add a helper text here. So this is for name. Okay, so here you add your name. And come on. Am I using the wrong the wrong parameter here? Let me check. Okay, yeah, I was. So it's just helper. And unfortunately, here in Expo, it doesn't, linter doesn't work that well, as you can see. So now we have the helper text here. And I want to add a placeholder. And type your name. And voila, we have a text for the text for the placeholder. Now, I want to change the text for the helper because I have a default one, right? But let's make it bold. Oops. Okay, so font bold. And voila, now let's make the text bigger. Large. And this is how you interact with this library. So it was designed to be as simple as you can see. And you can see still that the code looks good, right? It doesn't look like very disordered, or, you know, when you have the classes here at the bottom, you have more 200 lines just for styles. Okay, you can separate into different files, but I still prefer this look and feel here, right? It looks cleaner and very readable to whoever is working on that. Also, when working on teams, I mean, when you need to interact with more people, usually, like, it's not that uncommon to change something on the theme on the application and break things, right? So this way here, you can see exactly what is being applied in a given area of the application. And just one more example here, right? So on the button at the bottom, we have defined that this is a primary button. I will make it now a secondary, and it changed color. So this is the the color that is defined in the Tailwind config in the original implementation of Tailwind, right? So if I want to, let's say I want to redefine a color, I can now, for example, set as, let's make it for the secondary. And as I don't want to deal with hexadecimal codes right now, just let's put that as red. Actually, it was red, so green. Well, secondary, primary. wait a second. Okay, let's change it here. Ah, okay. Never mind. We need to recompile the application, because that is this is the Tailwind config is not processed in real time. So I won't do that right now, right? But we can extend things, and trust me, it will work. Right? All right, so that was the presentation. If you want to really take a look on the survey, you need to have Expo installed on your mobile device, and you can scan this QR code here, and you will have access to the demo application that we have created for this presentation. Feel free to send us feedback, and that's it.
Very good. Thank you, Paulo, for that. I think we had one question here in the chat box. Dave Richards asked, what do you estimate as a release date for Stable 1.0?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I would say, as an estimation, as a ballpark, I think that we could have that in about 1 month from now, right? So what is planning to have this is, we are already using it on our projects. So it's very stable. The only concern that I really have is, and I want to avoid with external people, is, let's say, having to change a strategy for a specific component and making it break, right? I think that the chances are pretty low now. Also, another thing that is pending is some complementation on accessibility. But yeah, let's say 1 month from now, David. And there was another one? No, just David.
Just that one question right now. Any other questions for Paulo prior to end of this session? And while someone may be typing a question, Paulo, what's the best way for everyone to contact you?
Yes, so the best way is through my email, so I can type it right now on the chat here as well. And I will also share John's email with everyone. So in case of any need of any sort, you can reach out to us. No problem.
Good. Right. And let's see here. It looks like we've got another question. For interest, are you using class names package?
We are not, David. And I know exactly what you mean, but we can do the same just using Tailwind syntax, right? So let's run an example here pretty quickly if we can. But let's say you want to specify something mandatory here on the sample. So as we were trying to change the color for for the button and we failed miserably. Let's do this. Let's run an example doing the same thing here. So I can do things like this here, okay? And look, as it is a backtick syntax, I can then add any sort of a variable here inside directly. So what I have here in brackets, David, you can put any arbitrary content here. Oops, but the syntax is wrong here. Yeah, so as you can see, I put a hexadecimal code here and it changed it in real time. So as it is arbitrary, and I could put any sort of variable here, it will just work, okay? We can think about having it, but I'm not sure if that makes sense to have class names here.
All right, thank you. Thank you for everyone who joined. I'm going to drop our next Lunch and Learn in the chat box. Feel free to join us again. That will be on, make sure I give you the correct date.
Thank you, Frank, for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So join us again on Wednesday, August the 24th. Thank you so much, Paulo. Very interesting stuff, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.